Hey everyone, we're Gabby,
Karim,
and Juls,
and you're listening to the Making of an Incredible MD podcast by Allied to Health.
Last season we took you behind the scenes of some of our mock MMI stations.
So we've talked about the GAMSAT and we've talked about the interviews. So now on to the next step. This season we're talking all things getting ready for med school.
We will be running you through what a day in the life of a medical student looks like, what study techniques to know about, what your career is going to look like, and much more.
So stay tuned and get ready to get med ready.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Making of an Incredible MD Allied podcast. I'm Jules, and today we're going to be talking about the different postgrad medical schools in Victoria with some amazing guests. I'd like to start the episode by acknowledging the traditional custodians and rightful owners of the land on which I'm recording today, which include the Yorta Yorta people and the Bangarang people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and I'd also like to extend my respects to any First Nations people who are listening to the podcast. So today we're going to be talking about the three postgrad med schools in Victoria, which are Melbourne Uni, Monash Uni, and Deakin. GemSAS preferences are going to be opening relatively soon, so we figured that people would have some questions about what all the different unis are like and which is best for them. So today we will be hearing from three med students across those three unis. We've got Elen from the University of Melbourne, Beck from Monash University, and Matt from Deakin. So thank you so much to our fantastic guests for answering some of our questions today. And without further ado, we'll just get started. Ellen, can I ask you to please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about where you're studying?
Yeah, so I'm Ellen. I'm a second year at Melbourne Uni this year, based at the Austin Hospital.
Thank you. Beck, what about you?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Beck. I'm in Year 3B at Monash University. I'm placed at Monash Medical Centre as part of Monash Health, and I'm sure we'll delve into it a bit deeper in a little bit, but 3B means I'm actually in the second year of my postgrad course, just due to merging of the undergrad and postgrad. We're called 3B as a collective.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm a second year Deakin medical student. So as I'm sure we'll probably get into, I'm not actually placed anywhere at the moment.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I guess since you've kind of touched on it, Matt, can you tell us a little bit about what the structure of your course looks like, what it looks like over the 4 years and stuff like that?
Yep. So, yeah, as you said, we're a 4-year course, as are both of the other like graduate entry model. So like with Melbourne and Monash, but the difference between main difference Deakin has is that we do 2 years preclinical. So we actually have 2 years based out of university, although you will do some placements throughout those first 2 years. You're not in hospitals full time until you start third year. And then it's a very, very similar vibe in terms of being in hospitals full time from there, and all your teaching comes from your clinical school once you're in third and fourth year. We'll probably talk about where clinical placements are a little bit later on, but yeah, basically Deakin's based out of Warren Ponds in Geelong, so an outer suburb of Geelong, and yeah, I think that's sort of a good overview.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's a great overview. So now moving over to Beck, and can you tell us a little bit about the structure of the course at Monash?
Yeah, so Monash has both undergrad and postgrad entries into medicine, and I'm doing the postgrad entry into medicine. So that's a 4-year course, and it starts off with a Year A course, which is the preclinical year, and that's based up in Gippsland, which we'll talk about a bit later. And then you've got 3 years of clinical placement. And then the undergrad course has 2 years of preclinical and then the same 3 years of clinical. So how it works is we're called, for the postgrad course, Year A, B, C, D, whereas the undergrads are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's called like Year 2A, which, you know, undergrad Year 2, postgrad Year A, and then Year 3B, which is undergrad Year 3 and postgrad Year B, and then that just sort of goes on to 4C and 5D.
Awesome. Thank you. That makes sense. And now, Ellen, can you tell us a little bit about Melbourne Uni?
Yeah, so Melbourne is also a 4-year postgrad course. We have 1 year preclinical and then 3 years clinical, where all of our teaching then comes from the clinical school that we're based at. Although there is increasingly some more clinical exposure in the first preclinical year. I think COVID permitting, it's usually about 1 day a week of clinical placement in first year.
Awesome, thank you. Going off a little bit into more detail, Matt, would you be able to tell us a little bit about what a typical day looks like for you at Deakin?
Yeah, sure. So it's obviously a little bit different at the moment. So like as all unis, we moved fully online for pretty much all of last year. I think we got about 6 weeks of like normal classes in before we went fully online. And we're only kind of just getting back to it now. So what we're like in terms of the sort of week structure of Deakin's course, you generally have like problem-based learning. So that's a Monday and a Friday class. And it's like, I think a few of the other unis have this as well. We've got like, we'll go through a case as a group, like a small group on Monday, and then sort of work out what you don't know and go through it as a group on Friday and like sort of cover any issues you guys had with the case. And the learning that week is meant to sort of be mapped to that like case. And then we have our sort of normal lectures that are dotted throughout the week. If you are lecture inclined. And then we've also got like, we'll have clinical practice tutes 1 day a week and a sort of like medical science lab workshop thing another day a week. And then we've got 1 day off as well. So generally the Deakin course, you've probably got, because it's split over 2 preclinical years rather than sort of fitting it into one, that is for a various number of reasons. But generally we're sort of doing four classes a week at the moment. So compulsory contact hours are pretty low, but just sort of trying to fit in like the learning around that. Because so much of it's online still, it's very flexible as to how you do it. So I'll sort of like, I try and get like exercise out of the way early and uni out of the way early, and then I'll sort of like clock off a bit earlier and maybe go for a surf or something, which is like the sort of benefit of Deakin is like you can live on the coast. So yeah, that's kind of my general week outline. I'll go back to Melbourne some weekends or stay down here some weekends as well. But yeah, it's not too hectic for us at the moment, which is nice.
Awesome. That sounds so good and so nice that you get to go out and have a surf and stuff. Always good to hear that there's a bit of work-life balance there. So Beck, can you tell us a little bit about what a day looks like for you at the moment? I guess both in terms of what your clinical year looked like and also what it's like now that you're on placement.
Yeah, so with being on placement at the moment, we do 4 days in at the hospital, and then Wednesday we have like an online Zoom day where we do lectures in the morning and then tutorials in the afternoon. So that's with either like Monash Health, so that includes like sites like Dandenong, Casey and Monash Medical Centre. And then in the afternoon, some of our tutorials are actually cohort-wide across all sites. And then Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, we have a variety of different activities that we do at placement. We have going around with like the teams on the wards, going into surgery, as well as you have classes organised at the university, such as like bedside tutorials with some of the doctors. You have clinical skills sessions with some of the nurse educators. So it's a really varied what you do on each day, but it makes it really interesting. And then just going back to pre-clin, a bit similar to Matt's experience at the moment with COVID, it was all online. So it was a bit more flexible in terms of when you studied and when you didn't. Year A was very content heavy. We were supposed to have placement, but with COVID it was cancelled, but it was intended to be once a fortnight placement in preclinical, and then the rest was all just classes and lectures and content.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Ellen, can you run us through a little bit of the same thing for Melbourne?
Yeah, so fairly similar overall to Monash by the sounds of it. So we, at the moment, depending what rotation you're on, can go on ward rounds, go to clinics, or into surgeries, or sort of otherwise join whatever team we're attached to in the hospital, in sort of whatever clinical encounters they're going through that day, as well as some informal teaching from them. And then there's also more formal teaching in things like bedside tutes and clinical skills tutes, and a few other tutorials with our group at the hospital, like professional practice, and we do some long case tutorials as well. And then we do have some teaching that's from the uni rather than the clinical school, so some lectures and webinars from them, and then all of our lectures basically are still online. So we have roughly about 3 days in the hospital at the moment, but that sort of depends hospital to hospital, and then roughly half the day to a day of our own self-directed learning, which is mostly watching the lectures and sort of catching up on content. And then preclinical was fairly similar. We had a similar setup with the Monday, Friday tutorial, and then the week in between, aiming to sort of fill that, all the gaps in our knowledge. So with lectures, tutorials, I think it was also, even when it was online, was not too contact heavy. We had probably about 4 tutorials, and maybe about 8 lectures a week. So it definitely wasn't an all day, every day situation. There was plenty of time for other things too.
Definitely, I think it's really coming across that, like, at all of the med schools, there's always like a bit of room to have a life outside of med as well. And if you're like, you know, a little bit flexible with when you do what, you can actually do lots of stuff outside, which is really good and really important. So moving on, what would you say sort of your overall experience has been like at your uni? And was there anything specific that made you choose to go to that uni? Let's start with Matt.
Yeah, before I get into that question, I'll just throw in a little bit of a definition, because this is something I didn't actually really know until recently. When we talk about like how our teaching is done by sort of the clinical school versus the uni, once you move into the clinical years of your course, you're almost handballed by the uni to like this sort of separate entity that's called like your clinical school, and the people that are like, they're pretty much hospital staff that work with your uni to teach you. Does that sound like a fair enough definition, guys? Yeah, I think because like I didn't really know how that worked until recently. So like I'm sure it'd be similar for the other unis as well. Like once you move into a clinical school, like you are then taught by that clinical school, and deacons kind of just like they're assessing you and making sure that you're like keeping up to date, and they like will liaise with the staff at the hospital, and like they're much more of an organising role versus like having lectures from like deacon teachers. Just so I'd throw that out there. But in terms of my experience with deacon, to answer the actual question, I've had a really good time. I think last year was obviously challenging for other reasons. It wasn't necessarily the uni. I think what's sort of been a really, this will probably come up again in the pros and cons of each uni, but like a reason that I chose deacon was actually because you have 2 preclinical years and 2 clinical years. So that sort of means that your preclinical teaching is like much more spread out, and it's sort of a little bit less intense. And sort of the reason behind that with deacon is deacon's sort of model and like the people they're trying to attract. They give a lot of bonuses, like you'll see when you apply for GemSAS, they give a lot of bonuses for people who've kind of like worked elsewhere, done other things, or like a little bit coming from like a wide variety of backgrounds. So we've actually ended up with like a very diverse year level of people, and like people who potentially have kids, or people who have sort of like jobs and stuff that they have to do. So that's why, like, one of the reasons why that deacon split their first year, like what is the first year at like the other unis, into 2 years. And I think I needed that coming out of my undergrad course, because that was like a pretty intense time. And I think I was really ready for like to slow it down a little bit. I know some people don't want that, and that's like completely fair enough, but that was definitely one of like my thought process, was like, I need to slow down a bit, because I was sort of like really starting to struggle in terms of motivation and like where I was at the end of my undergrad course. So that's kind of allowed me to work out a work-life balance a little bit better. Even like it's sort of improved even from last year to this year though, and as we've been coming out of those weird times. But yeah, I think overall that's been a real positive for me, like being able to focus on some other things around uni as well, because it's been a fairly relaxed timetable so far. And as well with like with my experience with the uni has been really positive, like really good pastoral care, very good staff. It's quite a small year level, so it's like the staff seem really like really engaged in you as sort of individuals, and it's quite a new uni as well, and like quite progressive. And so we've sort of been covering some topics that I didn't really like, that have been really good. Like they've got a really like quite a heavy focus on Indigenous and rural health, as well as like bringing in some like a lot of health equity and social justice issues as well, which has been really good. Hope that wasn't too much of a rant.
No, that all sounds awesome, honestly, making me wish I was going to Deakin. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that, Matt. Moving on to Beck, what's your experience been like at Monash, and sort of did anything specific like make you want to go there? Or
Yeah, so overall I've had a super positive experience at Monash. I also did my undergrad in biomed at Monash too. So it was just also quite nice to have some sort of continuity in terms of the uni and the way things work, as silly as that might sound. But also it was nice to go into the postgrad program with majority being biomed students from Monash. So we all had like a very similar base to start with. So quite different to Deakin, where you've got all the different people coming in. At Monash, majority of the people have done the same undergrad. So it's quite nice to have not everyone on the same level, but have build on a common knowledge base in that sort of way. But there also were people that did different degrees, and that also added variety and different knowledges and skill sets to the learning as well. Year A in Churchill was a fantastic year. It's a reasonably small cohort as well for Monash postgrad med. There's about 100 of us. And we had such a supportive staff and academic group up in Churchill, and they really tried so hard to make learning during COVID as interactive and help us get the most out of everything. So far it's been super good at Monash, and same with this year as well. We're now integrated with undergrads, and that's all been really smooth sailing so far as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for explaining all of that. Same question over to you, Ellen, about Melbourne Uni.
Yeah, so I've had a really good experience at Melbourne so far, even last year with everything being online. We're a much bigger cohort of about 350 people, I think. So potentially there's not quite the level of like closeness and sort of like, you know, the individual staff members can't quite sort of support everyone to the same extent. But I think because of that, we have a much like bigger team of staff who have been really great and supportive in like a slightly different way. And I think particularly that role had been filled a lot by our tutors, who we had this sort of like frequent interaction with. So that was really good. I also did biomed at Monash for my undergrad, and that was actually part of what made me sort of excited to go to a different uni for postgrad, just to get a bit of a different experience. And I think the cohort at Melbourne is sort of somewhere in between, where there's a good portion of the students did their undergrad, particularly in biomed at Melbourne, but there is also quite a few coming from other courses and then coming from careers or other sort of diverse backgrounds as well, which is super cool. And to be honest, the main reason that Melbourne appealed to me was the location, because I was based in the city at that time. So I thought, or not in the city, in sort of a metro area of Melbourne at that time. But as it turned out, I did have to move for placement anyway. So I would sort of caution you not to get too attached necessarily to where you are, because you will potentially have to move around a bit anyway. But that was my thought process at the time.
Thanks, Ellen. And that actually leads on perfectly to our next question, which is all about what it's like to live, where your school is. So, Matt, how have you found living in Geelong for Deakin?
That was probably something I should have mentioned as well, and like a reason I chose Deakin was because I was actually really keen to live where I am now. So I live in Torquay. It's like a 20-minute drive from sort of door to door from here to Deakin, because the Warren Ponds campus is on the Torquay side of Geelong, if you can kind of picture that. So yeah, I've loved it. Like my extended family has a sort of shared family house not far from here, so I've kind of grown up a bit around this area, and I just love it. Like I can't rave about it enough, really. Living on the coast, Torquay is a pretty awesome place, particularly if you're into the ocean, beaches, surfing. While it is a lot colder than you think it might be, it's actually it's a really nice, like a really nicely sized, good, like very, very positive community around here, I guess you could say, because it's like there's quite a significant young crowd and quite a like very chilled out retiree crowd, as well as like all your like classic like coastal locals. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I think it was sort of one of the things that really carried me through the difficult parts of last year, was living in a nice place like this. I do have friends that sort of live all around. There's like some mates that live in Geelong proper as well, so like they're a bit closer to the uni and they love it too. So you can really sort of pick and choose where you live, because it's not like you don't really have to worry about the traffic as much, like if you're trying to get to uni, being a bit more regional. So all positive for me. I think that's definitely, it's something that you, as Ellen said before, it's something you should definitely be considering early days, but you can't be expecting to be in the same place for 4 years and your career, because it's sort of looking like we're going to get randomly allocated after our degrees anyway now. It's a bit iffy with our sort of Z scores and what's happening there, but it's very likely you'll just end up somewhere completely random for your internships regardless. So it's as Ellen said, don't get too attached to it. You'll enjoy wherever you go, I think.
Yep, that's such a good point. And thank you so much for all of that amazing information. Beck, what is it like? What has it been like for you living in Churchill for, last year and I guess now, like relocating to Melbourne? What was that transition like?
Yeah, so I'd never moved out of home until last year. So 2020, I moved up into Churchill, which is a relatively small little country town, probably a couple thousand, maybe 3,000 or so people that live there. Moved into a share house with 3 other girls also doing the course, and we had the best year together. It was such a good vibe. Everyone up in Churchill was lovely. Most people were living in Churchill, so it was really good to stay super close to your cohort. It was 1 minute away from the uni too, so there was no travel time as well. So that was fantastic. But one of the actual reasons I did choose Monash was because I wanted to stay in Melbourne a bit where possible, because I'm really wanted to keep working at my job as a gymnastics coach in Melbourne. However, when I was up in Gippsland for the year, I also got a job at a gymnastics club in Traralgon, which is like the town over that's a little bit bigger. So I was able to keep coaching. But it was really nice this year to be able to come back to Melbourne and keep working at like my local club. So that was the reason that I chose Monash. And moving back home, back with like my family and stuff has been a bit of an adjustment, but it's really convenient. Like Monash Medical Centre is just 20 minutes down the road from where I live, so I don't have a huge reason to move out. But for the future placement years, I might not be at Monash Medical Centre, so we'll just have to see. And as has been echoed by Matt and Ellen, you can't get too attached to where you are. You've just got to be pretty flexible and ready to move if you need to.
Yeah, that's so true. And honestly, such an important point to make about just not getting too attached to the location, because you move around so much and like you can put in preferences for your placements, but honestly, like at the end of the day, who knows what happens. Ellen, how have you found living in Melbourne and now where you live now for your placement as well?
Yeah, so last year I was still living at home and getting in suburbs of Melbourne with my parents, and getting the train into the city for uni, which was great for the sort of 6 odd weeks that we were there. I had never been, because I was at Monash in Clayton, so I'd never been to uni in the city before, so that was quite a fun experience, kind of even doing the commute and having, the whole city around to, get drinks or food after uni. Like it was very like a great social vibe. It was sort of like a novel experience to be in the city. Maybe it would have worn off the long-ish commute later in the year, but sort of didn't quite get there in the end before it went online. But I really enjoyed being at the Melbourne campus for the bit we were there. And then I ended up moving to be closer to the Austin, where I'm going to be placed for the next 3 years, which is one of the things that's a little bit different about Melbourne. Mostly the hospital that you're placed at, you'll be at for the 3 years. It's a little bit different sometimes for some of the rural schools, but for the metro ones, that's generally how it is. So I was facing a hour to hour and a half commute each way from my parents' south side to the Austin north side. So I ended up moving in with 2 friends, a 10-minute walk from the Austin. So that's been good to be so close to placement, especially for the very early morning surge ward rounds. So yeah, I think that's been a fun new experience too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of your answers about where to live, which has been really insightful. In terms of sort of more the social aspects of your uni and sort of like what it's like in terms of joining committees or maybe being involved in extracurricular activities, I feel like you guys have kind of touched on that a little bit. But if you had anything to add about it, I guess, again, we can start with Matt.
Yeah, so I was actually, I was blown away. I'm not sure if Ellen and Beck can relate to this, but I was blown away with how many like medical committees there are at universities. It was almost like a whole university in itself. So like we, in terms of socially, it was like obviously last year was a bit different, but it started off really strong in the first 6 weeks that we were there, because of the location, there is a lot of people that have moved out of home to actually be at the uni. Like I'm sure Churchill would be a very similar vibe. But yeah, and as well, like the type of people that medicine tends to attract are like, there's a lot of like very like social, like keen to like people. So I think whichever med school you go to, there's going to be some like real social drivers, and it's not hard to meet people, because generally you have to be a fairly good person to get in, I think is a general rule. So yeah, that sort of more unofficial, outside of like the official like committees and stuff, that sort of social life was really cool. And we had sort of a really nice crew of people down like in Torquay itself. And then, yeah, your committees, there's like committees for pretty much everything. Like there's all the different specialty committees. So there's like, for example, there's a GP focus committee, or there's like an obstetric focus committee, there's an emergency medicine focus committee. And then you've got some sort of different groupings, like there's a rural health committee, as well as like your medical committee. And then there's like the kind of the MSA equivalent, there's like the Deakin Students Association as well. So there's like an unbelievable number of sort of specialty committees that you can join. So like pretty much whatever your interest is, I'm sure you could within medicine, I'm sure you could find a group of very like-minded people.
Thanks so much, Matt. What about you, Beck?
Yeah, pretty similar stuff to Matt. Being up in Churchill, everyone's out there together. You're sort of like some of the only young people up there. So everyone hangs out together and over at each other's houses for social things and study groups and whatnot. And especially during lockdown, we were on the regional side of the border. So we still had a bit of flexibility in our ability to socialise for parts of 2020. And then in terms of all the different like committees and the subcommittees, same thing as Deakin at Monash. There's just like 100 of them. I've just pulled up the list and it's crazy how many there are. There's like surgical group, peds group, community group, careers group. There's a teddy bear hospital as well, which is really cute. There's like orchestras, choirs, plays, research, women's health, emergency, psych, queer health. I'm actually part of the general practice students network as well. And I'm a working group officer with that. And it's actually a really collaborative role where there's a working group officer at each medical uni across Australia, and we all meet together. So that's also a really great way to meet people from other universities. For example, at the moment, I'm doing a research project with 4 other girls from different states all across Australia, and that's been really, really awesome. So yeah, there's a lot of social opportunities as well. There's, you've got your balls, your camps, there's like bar crawls and all those sort of fun things that are organised every year for all the different year levels. So there's definitely a lot more to med than just the study.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Sounds like you're part of some really cool clubs. So good that you get to like meet students from other unis as well. That's so awesome. I guess moving on to Ellen, in terms of what the social scene and what the committees and extracurricular stuff has been like at Melbourne for you.
So the social scene at Melbourne I've found to be awesome. Similarly to what Matt said, medicine does mostly sort of self-select for pretty lovely, people. But yeah, even before lockdown, everyone was lovely, friendly, sort of great to be able to go to some of the formal things organised by uni or by the med society, like nights out and things like that, but also more casual study groups and barbecues, going for drinks or chips after uni at the pub around the corner was good fun. And I think now being on placement, people haven't necessarily moved, depending how long people's commute were. So there's less of the everyone living together situation for the metro hospitals, but I still think everyone has this, shared common experience of being at the same hospital together over the 3 years. So that's still been like a very supportive, social, great vibe so far too. And Melbourne does also have a stack of committees for every specialty under the sun and lots of other interests, advocacy groups, fun, like just all sorts of clubs and committees. So I'm involved with a couple, including MD Queer, MedFem, a holistic health student society, and you can also get involved at Melbourne with organising our student conference every year, which is actually a unit that we all have to do as part of the degree every year, but it's totally student run, which is a lot of fun. and a way you can meet people across different year levels and sort of external to the uni, meeting lots of cool speakers and presenters too. So that's been lots of fun.
Thank you so much, Ellen. I think we'll just sort of start wrapping up now. So my last question to you guys will be if you're able to sort of summarize the main pros and cons that you can think of for your uni or that you think people should keep in mind when they're deciding where to apply. So yeah, we'll just start with Matt again.
Yep, so pros that are sort of specific to Deakin. I think like anywhere you go, you're going to find good people and probably pretty good like staff and have a good time. I know my sort of friends that have gone interstate as well. So not even the like Victorian unis have all had like a really good time and raved about it, even when they were sort of really hesitant about going to those unis initially and moving out of Victoria. But in terms of sort of pros that are specific to Deakin, you've got, I guess some people would say this as a con because you're not getting into clinical schools as quickly, but that was a pro for me, having the 2 years pre-clinical as opposed to one. Sort of has lent itself to a very relaxed vibe. Although you do have to still do some work, it sort of leaves you a bit more wiggle room in terms of what you want to do around uni. And it means you're not getting as intense as quickly, because once you're in hospitals full time, like you're in hospitals full time, and those are pretty big. Like you're turning into pretty big days pretty quickly. Another pro of Deakin, I'm sure this isn't just Deakin, but this is an experience I've found is really positive with Deakin, is the variety of the cohort that it attracts. I've really enjoyed that, like the sort of the huge variety of backgrounds, although you do get a lot of people coming from undergrad science backgrounds. You get a lot of like allied health professions coming into the course, as well as like completely random courses as well, like music students. Like there's a guy who duxed one of the years prior to me, who was a chef before he came into Deakin, because you don't have any prerequisites for the Deakin course, like unit prerequisites, which is actually, I think that's just a Deakin thing. So you can actually come into it. You just have to do a GAM set and do an interview and have some sort of like score from like a undergrad something or like a training program prior, and you can come into the course. And then the location was a real big pro for me as well, being able to live on the Surf Coast, as well as I think the pastoral care and support at Deakin was really good. There's a psychologist who is just employed full time for the medical students, and there's a really, really sort of well-being focus in the course. Cons, I think some people would see the not getting as much clinical experience in terms of like you've only got the 2 clinical years versus the 3. Something like some advice that I would give to people listening to this is you really need to weigh up what your priority is, and the balance you're sort of wanting to have in your life moving through the medical school, and particularly those like pre-clinical years. So yeah, you won't get into clinical years as quickly. You will, if you're from Melbourne, you'll likely have to move out of home. So that, again, for some people is quite a challenge and is difficult. But I think it's been really fun and really rewarding as well. There's not a huge amount of other sort of like big cons that I can speak to. If I think of anything, I'll come back.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. What about you, Beck? What would you say is sort of some of the main takeaway pros and cons from Monash for you?
Yeah, so I guess I was thinking of a couple of things, but it's just depending on who you are and the way you look at it, you can decide if it's a pro or a con. So I guess to start with, if you think about year A up in Churchill, to me that was a really big pro to experience rural life, considering I've lived metro my entire life. So I guess it's a pro or a con either way you look at it. in terms of the 1 year preclinical and then following 3 years clinical, that actually really suited me because I really like the hands-on sort of approach. And our preclinical year was very full on. So it's nice to come into the clinical year where there's actually been a lot more flexibility. It's slowed down a bit, and it's I've really enjoyed that. And then another thing that I really think is a pro about Monash University, but others might think is more of a con, you move around sites quite a lot. So this year I'm at Monash Medical Centre, but next year I could be part of like the Central Clinical School, which includes hospitals like Alfred, Cabrini, Epworth, Frankston. And even within your clinical school, you can move again, between Cabrini for a bit, Alfred for a bit, Frankston for a bit. So you get to experience how lots of different hospitals work. But then again, some people might see that as a con, that you might not be able to form as many connections with the staff and you don't become as familiar with one place. So I guess they're probably the 3 main points.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Beck. And Ellen, what would you say are sort of the major pros and cons of Melbourne for you?
So I think potentially a con, again, depending how you look at it, is that is quite a large cohort compared to most of the other medical schools in the state and the country. So a very big cohort. I guess it's quite an old uni and an old medical school as well, which has potentially both pros and cons. It's perhaps some might say traditional in some aspects, although does have a wealth of awesome staff and lecturers with really strong ties to the uni because of its length of history, which is cool. I think really could be a pro or a con depending how you look at it, being based essentially just at one clinical school for all of the clinical years. So that's sort of a con for me, especially because I really would have liked to have some rural placements as well. That's not going to be super easy for me to obtain, unfortunately. But I guess I do have the stability of staying at one hospital for the whole time and the familiarity and building relationships there. Yeah, I guess another pro probably for a lot of people for the first year especially is the very central location, very easy to get to from pretty much anywhere. And a lot of the clinical schools are reasonably central to Metro Melbourne as well. So depending how long of a commute you're willing to tolerate, you potentially won't have to relocate unless you end up rural. Although, as I said, I actually think that is awesome, and I'm kind of sad to not have that be a big part of my course, unfortunately. But yeah, pros and cons.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ellen. And yeah, it definitely sounds like there's just, there's pros and cons to every uni. And I feel like listening to this, it's really just bringing home the fact that no matter where you end up, you're going to have an awesome time. There's probably going to be some things that are a bit different or not exactly what you would have chosen, but overwhelmingly, I think everybody has an awesome experience at whichever med school they end up at. So I think that brings us to the end of the podcast tonight. So just want to say a huge, huge thank you to our amazing guests tonight, Matt, Beck and Ellen, for volunteering your time to tell us a bit more about what your experience has been like. I think it's going to be so, so helpful for all of our listeners.
Thank you for listening to the Making of an Incredible MD podcast by Allied to Health. Please like, share and subscribe to help spread the word about our podcast. And we'd love to hear your feedback. So send us an email or message on Facebook. All of our links are in the show notes. Thanks. We'll see you next time.